You have no idea who this man is, and yet you call him scum.
People like him are the reason Italian Americans have such a bad image.
I agree.
Ask any American to describe an Italian American in this country. Invariably, is going to reference The Godfather, Goodfellas,
Good movies.
and the rest are going to mention pizza.
Good movies to eat pizza by.
Stop it, Jason.
Dad, at this point in our cultural history, mob movies are classic American cinema, like Westerns.
I have to agree there, Rich. You know, you never saw the Scotch-Irish pissing and moaning about always being portrayed as rustlers and gunslingers.
Oh, that's absurd.
See where you started with your gravy, Nana?
You see what you started with your gravy, indeed. Welcome to Cut to Black, a Sopranos sit down. We're changing it up just a little bit as we take a small little off ramp before diving into season 2. As this week we're discussing Goodfellas, of course, in relation to the Sopranos. I am Jim Scampoli.
I'm Jacob Burrows, and it's been a long time since I saw Goodfellas. I have seen it, but it was kind of foggy, and it was really a treat to get into it, especially after getting to know some of these actors through The Sopranos, because I don't even know at this point how many overlap.
I did look it up, and although since you're only technically one season in, for people that don't know, Jacob Burrows is watching The Sopranos for the first time, so it's even more hurtful for him to have to wait another week to start season 2. But he's only one season in, and you're already seeing familiar faces. I believe there are 27 actors that are both in The Sopranos and Goodfellas.
That's some movies just have 3, actors at all, but this one has 27 that are in both. And well, I did kind of look into some of the actors, and some of them said like, this person's known from The Sopranos and from Goodfellas, and I was like, do I recognize that guy? I don't know. I'll Google his name and add Sopranos. Like, I won't type anything more. I don't want any spoilers, but even just in the Google search bar, it added death to the end. So I'm like, okay, so I know that character dies. It's not really a spoiler, but it's kind of like, okay, I'm not going to do any more digging, so I'll let you filter the facts for me as usual.
Yes, I mean, and one that I completely forgot and actually didn't make the connection until I was going through them, and he's in season 1, is the rabbi that calls Tony a golem, a Frankenstein. He's actually Maury's wigs. Maury's wigs don't come off.
Yeah.
What a great character.
Yeah. Great character in both, even.
Yes, exactly.
And it is the Goodfellas. I mean, Goodfellas. By the way, it's in Swedish. It's called Mafia Bröder, which means Mafia Brothers for some reason.
I always that's what it's called in English. Mafia Bros.
I mean, it was supposed to be called Wise Guy or Wise Guys, but apparently there was a movie and a TV show out at the same time with that name, so they changed it to Goodfellas. Better, I mean, if it came out now, we would have called it Goodfellas here in Sweden too, but at the time it was like, nobody... I guess people don't really necessarily get the name in English either, but, you have the poster, you have people in suits, you get it.
Yeah, I don't, I mean, given I was very young when it came out, but I don't feel like it was a common term for like a mafioso or anything like that. But yeah, you see the poster, you see a dead man, you see some Italians in suits. How those Italians get suits? Clearly they're in the mob, as the Melfi family have pointed out. Dragging these hardworking Italian Americans through the mud. Yeah. But first, let's just talk a little bit about the movie. Now, you said, of course, it's been a while since you've seen it, and now you're seeing it in this new light through the Sopranos lens. But just in general, what? Just a fucking legendary cinematic masterpiece, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it's hectic. I mean, I say this in a good way. I did read a bit about the production and behind the scenes, and about how Scorsese kind of saw it as like the speed and energy of the movie should reflect the speed at which these mobsters live their lives, and kind of give you the sort of thrill of it as you're going. And obviously it portrays the life as very positive and also as very negative. But even just in the way it's put together, I think that's sort of the difference where today we make films, or in the past, all over the timeline, we've made films that are sort of, they're just competently put together. And the reason Scorsese and people like him are magnificent is that he's actually had this in mind and made something that works, like where the film itself represents the core of what it's about, the way it's put together, not just the content of the film.
Yeah, and I read one of the quotes from Scorsese because I mean obviously this movie has a ton of narration, which is typically a no-no, right? What is your knowledge? What has your education taught you as far as like voiceover and narration?
I mean, that's I don't like everyone has an opinion on it. That's what I've learned. Like, but there, I've never heard anyone as far as people teaching me saying like, oh, if you use that, it's bad. It's just an opinion people have, and more viewers than writers, I feel, or writers will say, oh, don't do that, it's lazy. But I mean, it's not. I mean, that's the thing as well. He said something about it being a punk sort of feeling of doing everything to the max, right? Or what was the quote you had in mind?
So it was like that, and also kind of in the air of these guys who break the rules and kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah.
It was just another representation of, I guess, the mob lifestyle, or like the mafia, the mafioso. Yeah, or punk rock, or just going by the beat of your own drum. Because yeah, I mean, in this, I think the narration's great because it's so fast and it's so much information coming at you, and like the way the dialogue is still kind of lowly below the narration, so you're picking up little things. And then even like I've seen this movie so many times, and you pick up like rewatching it. There's that scene where like young Henry's like talking to Tuddy about something, but in the background you see all the guys trying on these yellow cardigans that they just stole.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're all like they're picking them out of boxes and they're like holding them to their chest to check out the shirts, and then they're all wearing them. And then when he walks outside to like go to a car, all the guys sitting outside are also wearing the yellow cardigans. So
Right.
they're all like really excited. Just like so much information, the way it's packed in and the way it jumps around. And then just thinking about the way the movie unfolds, where there's not, I mean, the through line is obviously Henry's story, but it just kind of will jump to thing. It's like, okay, Henry's a kid. Now he's older and causing more crime. And then this is where he meets Karen. But there's not like a particular through storyline. It's just that Henry's a constant, and we're going through all these different like little segues with him from this robbery to this robbery to this thing.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it is so dense. Every single frame has so many things going on. And at the same time, as you said, it's not like one story necessarily. It's like a bunch of small kind of connected stories, and that gives it a sense of realism, because otherwise it might be, in the first act we have him entering the mob world, and in the second, oh, he gets the heist he wanted, but then things start going south, and all those things are in there. It adds up, but it's refreshing that it just does whatever, kind of, where he goes to jail for a few years or prison, and like getting to see all these different aspects almost in a modular way of here and there in mafia life, as it were.
And I think just as a movie in general, at least to me, like the energy of the movie is really infectious.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about during the finale discussion last week. We were talking about just in general what the show kind of means to you personally, and I was talking about like creatively, like it's like inspiring. And Goodfellas is like that, and it's more even like infectious, where you watch it and you're like, I want to make something, I want to do something like this. I mean, and I'm not talking about the content of like Henry Hill shooting people and taking what he wants. I just mean
a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. I just mean like the energy of the movie. Like I believe Peter Jackson, like making Lord of the Rings, he talked about how he would watch Goodfellas like regularly, and that would get him like kind of amped amped up, ready to go to Mordor or whatever the fuck. You know
Yeah,
what
I
I mean?
think that's connected to what we were saying, that it's made with intent, and even though like it's you might call it sloppy because it does whatever, it does kind of this and that, but it has still intent behind all of it because it's all in support of like the basic story, or not the basic feeling is all brought together by the way it's put together. And as you said, like all the narration, some might say it's too much, but you know, narration's bad when it's like, I came back later and this place, oh, I didn't know what it was like. And you're just telling the same stuff that you're already seeing. But when you're adding narration and it's adding another dimension to it, and it's accelerating the whole story, making everything like jump back 5 years, jump forward 10 years, whatever, that's going to make you aware of the film as you're watching it, and start like get you thinking about all the different things he's doing, all the influences they're pulling from, because it's a heck of a lot of different stuff coming together to make this, yes, probably a masterpiece.
And with the narration and stuff, what I was thinking about watching the movie, it's interesting how, I mean, obviously not just Goodfellas, but Goodfellas is probably one of the best examples, is the way Sopranos uses it as shorthand for some of the stuff happening in the show. Like, you don't necessarily have to watch The Godfather or watch Goodfellas to get what's happening in The Sopranos, obviously, but I feel like with stuff like Capos and Cruz and some of the stuff they're doing with construction, or getting involved in other people's businesses and obviously using it to their own gain, uh with Goodfellas, it kind of explains some of that, and especially with the narration when they're talking about, like where Henry Hill basically explains what the mob is, and it's like it's the police for wise guys. It's like for people that can't go to the cops, this is who you go to for protection. And then we see that play out, and of course they give you protection and then they bleed you dry and then throw you away. But all that stuff really helps in the shorthand, because we talked about in The Sopranos, where they don't stop to try to explain to you this money they got from a guy they killed, or this construction site they go to shake down a union or whatever the fuck. And they don't need to, but I just like that it kind of fills in some of the blanks if you're curious.
That's why it makes so much sense to do this between seasons, because not only do they mention the show or mention the movie in the show, I mean, like at the clip at the beginning, it's also, as you said, when Karen asks him what Henry Hill does for a living, he says he's a union rep. And given that, and given all the stuff they do, all the stuff that's explained in voiceover, like, for example, like what happens when they take over a restaurant, and he's like, oh, we did it like this and like that, and then we had to burn the place down because of this. And like you get all of that in like 1 minute of the movie. And yeah, as you said, it's kind of like you assume that the viewer of The Sopranos has also seen Goodfellas, or at least is culturally aware of it, and that's like it builds upon Goodfellas along with a whole host of other movies. When Tony goes to a therapist, because Henry Hill could not go to a therapist in this movie, it wouldn't make any sense. But that's why The Sopranos is also adding something new to the whole mob mythos.
Yes, and I mean, back to like seeing some of the same actors, and it's like, now when you watch, like if you watch Sopranos, and Paulie has such a small part and he's in the background of a bunch of scenes, but to me it's like, oh my god, there's Paulie, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Even though it's just him getting out of a car and closing a door and maybe laughing in the background, like he doesn't really have a speaking role per se. He's in a lot of these flashbacks at the cab stand, like in Tuddy's Crew, but it's still like super exciting now. And then of course Lorraine Bracco as Karen, Henry's wife, and she's great in the movie. I mean, I don't think she won, but she was nominated for an Oscar, and it's kind of, it's the quintessential part, because obviously these crime movies, TV shows, what have you, they're male dominated usually for the most part. So it is kind of a harder role to not make grating. Like, they're like kind of like the idiots that respond to like Skylar on Breaking Bad. And then I think there was even a little bit of that with Carmilla in Sopranos,
Right. Yeah.
like because it's kind of like a thankless role where, I mean, at least with Sopranos and Goodfellas, they play with it more where Karen and Carmilla are more complicit in what's happening. But there's still that level of like, they're not really the conscience, but they kind of will point out like we're the audience having fun with the main character who's kicking
Yeah.
ass and loving life, and then this other person's like, hey, stop doing that, and we're like, yeah, fuck you.
Yeah, go away, mom. You're not our mom. That's what we say to the Karen and the Carmillas and the Skylars of the world. But yeah, as you said, it's kind of a thankless role to be in. I believe she said that she had to make herself indispensable to the movie. Like she really had to add something, or she would have just been that flat character who's like, what are you doing? And I mean, obviously she does. She does a great performance and is not really recognizable from The Sopranos at all.
And what's interesting, and I guess this is kind of old, but I didn't know this, or maybe I just knew it and forgot it, but I guess David Chase did originally offered Lorraine Bracco to be the Carmilla part, the wife of Tony Soprano.
Ah.
And it's but she was the one that's like, no, I've done that. I don't like. She even said after Goodfellas happened, she just got a ton of mob scripts. Like every mob script was sent to her agent,
Of course.
and I guess initially it was even when the Sopranos showed up, it was like, no, I don't want to do this. But then she read the script and really liked it. But then she kind of campaigned and put herself in the running for the Melfi role,
Mhm.
and it's such a smart move. Obviously, I feel, because I Carmilla is kind of mining the same type of ground that the Karen role is, because you see how it plays with it, where I kind of really like this lifestyle. And she even says like when the first time, if my friends were asked to hide a bloody gun, they would have like ran for the hills, but I was turned on by it. And I think that rings true, like obviously not just for a woman, but even the reason why we like these movies as men, because it's like a power fantasy. Like, yeah, some guy looks at me wrong, I'm gonna fucking shoot him in the head and beat him up with my friends. And so you see that with Carmilla. You see that Carmilla has this, what's going to happen to me and my family if something happens to Tony, and Tony takes advantage of me, but also I love that we have this great house and we could do whatever we want. So there's interesting stuff to mine there, but I appreciate the fact that she had already done it and wanted something different.
Yeah, and I mean, now she's probably. I mean, yeah, she's known for Goodfellas, but The Sopranos is a very huge sort of thing too, as far as just volume, because she's this role, and yeah, she was nominated for an Academy Award, but in The Sopranos, that's like years of quality work where we get to see her portray this character for such a long time, and I can imagine like after 9 years of getting mob scripts, it's like, well, if I'm going to be in the mob show, at least make me not literally the same person as before, maybe, since I'm going to be this person for years. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, I mean, there's the famous shots in the Goodfellas. In Goodfellas, you got, I mean, there's the obvious, the Copacabana shot where it's, the oneer that follows them through the back entrance and through the kitchen and all that. But I mean, rewatching it, just thinking about it in general, like the camera's always moving. And there's a lot of shots that are like that. Maybe they're not as long or as elaborate. So that's why that one sticks out. But I mean, I'm not really breaking ground saying that Goodfellas is like a great piece of filmmaking, but oh my God, what a great piece of filmmaking.
Sure. I mean, he did mention that he wanted to use all the tricks of the new wave from around 1961. And my first reaction reading that was like, get the fuck out of here, Martin. You're not making a French new wave film, okay? But then, like, thinking about it, the French new wave was kind of all about saying, fuck you. I'm going to do what I want. And that air is certainly in this because of the elements of the cat, like as you said, them going into the club. That's a famous one. but there's one where the camera's going around earlier and showing all the different mob people and listing their names, and they're all kind of saying hi to the camera, and that would feel out of place if this movie didn't do whatever the fuck it wanted, you know? That would feel out of place in The Sopranos. Like a lot of people set their style almost in a limiting way where, you know, we've said in our discussion of The Sopranos, like, oh, what are they doing? This isn't like The Sopranos, because they've already made us feel like what the style of the show is. And the style of this one is kind of like doing like they're doing freeze frames or freeze frames on like still images here when his life is about to meet some sort of turning point. And they do that in The Sopranos, but in The Sopranos we're like, the fuck are you doing? At least some of the time.
Yeah.
And here it's kind of like, yeah, of course, of course you're doing this.
And I do need to call out real quick. It's a different show. It's not The Sopranos I'm referencing here from Goodfellas, but there's a scene in Goodfellas where what we learn about Karen Hill, I don't know her actual last name, but Karen Hill, we meet her parents. Her parents are Jewish, and there's that funny scene where he has to hide his crucifix when he comes to pick her up, and there's a lie that he's half Jewish, and he says, you know, just the good half. But there's a scene where after they're married and Karen's up with her parents, and her parents are like bickering with her about how Henry's staying out all night. And I'm like, this is the marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Who would have thought that Goodfellas was there to set up the marvelous Mrs. Maisel? Because that scene, you pluck it out of Goodfellas, put it in marvelous Mrs. Maisel, it's exact. It's fitting.
Yeah, that's true. I recall that now that you mention it.
And then, yeah, that's just a quick aside. But the other thing with Goodfellas, obviously, is it's more like the day to day, as far as like the mafia stuff, much in the way that The Sopranos is. And I haven't watched the Godfather movies in a long time, but I do know it's kind of one of the things cited as like a big difference. And I think David Chase even mentions it himself. Where with Goodfellas, it's more kind of day-to-day crew stuff, and it's getting into how these psychopaths are like likable and funny.
Yes, because he's intentionally, or they're intentionally showing how it becomes mundane for them. And he even says in voiceover that, you know, the killing became just a secondhand thing. So then all of a sudden you're killing people over almost nothing because it's like, it's so commonplace, because it's like, you know, just a thing you do. And they're so insular. They don't talk to anyone from outside the crew. So it becomes their version of normality. And that's also what the movie's doing with us, because we're in there and there's more time spent on them talking and bullshitting than actually murdering people. Don't quote me on that. If you do the percentages, there's quite a lot of murders as well. But as you said, we're getting to know them, and it's a lot about the jargon back and forth, which I was surprised to read that some of it was based on like improv between the actors, that they sat down and just improvised a bit, and then that they just kind of wrote that, and that the scene of, you know, one of probably, I don't know, more famous scenes or more influential scenes of Joe Pesci like joking around and being funny, and then suddenly asking, what, I'm a funny guy? What do you mean? And that whole scene, which is such a great exchange, and it just came from just sitting around and talking. So that gives me hope for you and me, Jim, because we do a lot of sitting around and talking.
Yeah, they said they would just record rehearsals and kind of let the actors kind of play out a thing, and then Scorsese would like pluck what he really liked and put it in the script, and they'd kind of rework it. And yeah, like obviously the you know, funny how, like, I'm here to amuse you, that scene, it's one of, you know, it's everyone knows that it's one of those culturally like huge scenes. And but even like when it plays out through the rest of it, because then we get Larry Boy from The Sopranos comes in, he's the owner of that bar. And you know, that's where things like really escalate, because it's such a perfect way to convey the information of like everything's fun, even though he's telling a story about like telling a cop to go fuck his mother, but everyone thinks it's so funny. And then but the way it plays out, where everything gets tense, with, how am I funny? You realize like, oh yeah, they're laughing so hard because yeah, this guy's entertaining and likable, but they're also putting on the laugh as well because they don't want to piss him off.
Yeah.
And then we see that play out because they have the fake out when he's talking to Henry and it gets tense. And then it's like, oh, he's just messing with him. But then when the owner of the bar is just trying to get paid for $7,000 in drinks in the 60s, like what's the inflation rate on that? He like smashes a thing on his head and then everyone laughs harder. And I was watching the background, even the people in the background that are just watching it, they're laughing. And it's just because, I mean, it's not that funny when you see someone get smashed in the head with a glass and they're hurt. It could be funny, don't get me wrong. But I just like that layer of fear that's kind of, pushing the laughs further. And, like we see in Sopranos, there's that cold open at the beginning of episode 2. I mean, there's no violence there, but we get to see some mob guys just hanging out bullshitting, and there's side conversations, and there's a lot of humor, and it's really funny just seeing these guys hanging out being guys. But then we're reminded that they're fucking monsters,
Yes, which puts, I guess, into perspective Artie and his point of view of we don't want this to be a mob place, where there's a fine line between there's an extra bit of Italian spice in here, and then all of a sudden someone owes you 7,000 and they're never going to pay and they're going to smash a bottle over your head, and he's a made man, so don't worry, you're never going to touch him, no one's ever going to do anything to help you, so this is just the world for you now, Artie.
Well, and plus, like the way that plays out, the best option for that guy is to go to his boss and then just be taken advantage of in a way where it almost is like, was this planned?
Yeah.
Because he has to go to Paulie and ask Paulie to, why am I spacing on Pesci's character's name right
It's
now?
Tommy,
yeah, to ask Tommy to calm down. And all that does is he has to give up a piece of his place. And as we see, they just run up all the credit, bleed the place dry, and then burn it down for insurance money. So that's how everything gets to play out for him. But then there's the other scene. It's such a fucking great scene when they're at Tommy's mother's house after they've got Billy Bats in their trunk. And she's, an old Italian mother, so she wants them to sit down and have dinner. And, everyone knows that maybe everyone doesn't know, but the mother's played by Scorsese's actual mother. And they're having dinner, and she shows her painting and stuff. And it's such a thing where you feel like you don't really need to have, like, you could cut this out of the movie. Well, not the whole scene, but this whole back and forth about the painting. But it's such a great moment of them like goofing and laughing about this guy they have in their trunk. And I do have a quick clip I want to play. It's actually from David Chase talking about Goodfellas and kind of that scene specifically.
Okay, great.
I mean, Goodfellas was a very important movie to me. And Goodfellas really plowed that. I found that movie very funny and brutal. And it felt very real. And yet it was the first, I think that was the mob. Of course, all of his work has been like that, but that was the first time he actually dealt with a mob crew. As opposed to, say, The Godfather, in which there's something operatic about it and classical, and even the clothing and the cars. And, I mean, I always think about Goodfellas when they go to the mother's house that night and they're eating and, she brings out her painting. That stuff is great. I mean, The Sopranos was learned a lot from that.
So, yeah, like that's kind of, you see it even in just season 1 here, The Sopranos, you see that he's kind of mining that same type of territory. And it's kind of the most interesting stuff in a way. Like, obviously, obviously, The Godfather is like a classic movie. But I don't know. It seems more interesting to get the more mundane mixed in with this like hyper gangster life,
Yes, and that scene in another movie might have been, we're putting this in because it's important where the knife came from, and, they play it up as it's very important that we killed this made man, but I guess, yeah, it does come up because they killed Joe Pesci later. But you know, it's not because of them going to his mother's house and having that meal first. The point of it is not to like, oh, and this is the trail, this is the scene of the crime and what happened on that day. It's actually to show the mundane everydayness of it, and they managed to do that at the same time as they're going at a breakneck speed. I guess it's because that scene would be kind of boring if there wasn't a body in the trunk. It's this Hitchcock thing I always come back to where Hitchcock said, you know, if the audience knows there's a bomb under the table, they're going to be on the edge of their seat, even if it's a boring conversation. And in this case, we know that the guy in the trunk is alive. Granted, we know it's not going to be a daring escape for him because we've seen him get stabbed in the first minute of the movie. But it still like adds a whole something to all this ordinary stuff going on. Because if you cut out all the violence from Goodfellas, it would still be funny, but it would not be tense, and it wouldn't really. I mean, that would be a stupid thing. Who would do that?
Well, and also the way Henry is in that scene. Not to say that Henry is like a great guy or that much better than, say, Jimmy or Tommy. But I mean, there's a reason why the mother comments like, you know, you're not eating, you're not talking.
Yeah.
And maybe it is because, I mean, as we see as the movie folds out, he does turn on his friends. And it's not that that makes him a better person, but maybe he is just a little bit different where it's not just like, oh, hey, food, this is awesome, jokes, and the way they can crack a joke about how the guy in the painting looks like the dude they just killed.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we also see that again when they have to dig up the body. Another, you know, kind of reminiscent of when Christopher digs up his murder, you know, a few months later. And Henry's like puking and he can't believe it. And they're just like cracking jokes like, there's a leg, we got a wing.
Well, the thing is as well that in The Sopranos, Christopher says, right, that like I gotta dig it up before they build condominiums over there, and that's the thing they say in Goodfellas. But in Goodfellas, it's like, yeah, they're actually doing that, so you have to move the body. And in The Sopranos, they're doing that because he watched the Goodfellas too many times.
Yeah, basically. And also, it's a little bit. He's, as Tony says, he's got cowboyitis, and it's like when Henry's talking to Karen earlier in the movie, like the only people that get pinched are the people that want to get pinched. You know, the guy wanted to get away from his wife. That's why he went to jail. It's such a silly concept, and we see that that's not quite how things play out. But
yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, he does go to jail and come out and everything. So maybe.
And the other thing, kind of in the same vein of that, is when they do beat up Billy Bats. Well, I mean, beat up, like that's kind of, I'm playing it down. But when they like kick like beat him to death, basically, and they grab like Tommy's grabbing the tablecloths to wrap him up, and he looks at Henry and he says, "I didn't want to get blood on your floor." And then Henry has that reaction like, "Dude, do you realize like what we're doing right now? Like, settle down." Just little things like that. And I mean, I guess it could be said that they have to do that because partially Henry Hill is still our hero of the movie and it's his story. So maybe they have to kind of vanilla him up a bit and make him seem like he's not as much of a monster as some of the other guys. But I just like how there's just little stuff. They don't try to hit you over the head with it and make it seem like he's a good guy. There's just a few things where he's not quite all right with with a body in the trunk that they have to go stash.
Yeah, though, I mean, to be fair, I feel like Tommy is like on the extreme. Obviously, I mean, he's a psychopath, and Paul, like the boss guy, he's obviously more in line with Henry and like more calm and reasonable. And that's sort of Henry's first boss and first influence. I mean, it's still his boss later, but he starts doing his own thing. And I guess that's, it's weird that even I think most mobsters as well in this movie would they'd kill a guy and it's no big deal, but just, Joe Pesci, fucking, he's so crazy, man. He brings it to 11, and yet nobody can do anything about it because he's one of the guys.
Yeah, I guess right. It's like, and I mean, obviously the movies have to play up the murder and everything, but I'm sure for most guys, it's like you will go to murder if need be, but it's not your first option. I mean, of course, we could point to Spider's scene, Christopher Moltisanti, aka Michael Imperioli, breakout role in Goodfellas as Spider, bringing the drinks. And one thing I kind of never picked up on for some reason is that Tommy does ask for a drink at the beginning of the scene, and Spider doesn't bring him a water. Like he asks for a water.
Oh, so you're saying it? It was justified in the end.
And it's such a great back and forth. It's like a weird Abbott and Costello bit with the way Spider's saying, no, I thought you said you were right, Spider. And he's like, no, you ain't all right, Spider. And he's like, no,
I thought you said you're all right, Spider. I'm all right, Spider. No, you ain't all right. Yeah, and then he dies, or he gets shot in the foot first, which, I mean, how much of a coincidence is this, Jim? Do you have another clip of David Chase like, well, he got shot in the foot in Goodfellas, so we thought it would be hilarious if he shot a guy in the foot in our show, like a bit less deep, but still kind of interesting?
Yes, for sure. It's absolutely nice little callback, and I guess Spider's revenge, if you will, when Christopher gets to be mad at the guy at the bakery or what have you that's making him wait in line a little bit too long. And I think I was reading that Joe Pesci actually said that was one of the hardest things for him to do, just because he kind of getting in that mindset. And I guess maybe to him, like if he's playing the part, he kind of thought of Tommy having a bit more humanity than that. But it's still great. Well, good.
Go ahead.
All right, I will. It's so great because he's just like, what do you want? Him a good shot when they're like he's dead. And it's not even that Jimmy's that great of a dude. He's just annoyed that it's another body, like another thing to worry about. And he's like, you're digging the hole. I don't got any lime. You're doing it. And he's like, what, you think I've never dug a hole before? Where are the shovels?
Yeah. And I mean, as you said, first he seems like, oh yeah, he's the reasonable one. But even when when they do kill the made man and Pesci comes back in and Henry goes to try to calm him down or stop him, but Jimmy, Robert De Niro, just kind of grabs hold of him and he's totally on board immediately. He's like, yeah, of course we're killing this guy. I mean, it's even like the film doesn't really tell us until later that no, they could never become made men because they have this Irish descent, and that's kind of that influences a lot of the movie, even though they don't mention it until so much later, really, because that's why he would want to kill a made man as well, not just because Joe Pesci's upset, but because he wants to be that and he can't be that too. And Joe is kind of beneath him, working for him in a way, but he's also the closest thing to being one of those. And when he's going to become a made man, you'd think that he'd be super jealous maybe, but no, for him it's all of them are getting made. So that kind of sheds a bit of light on his point of view.
I think that's a nice read on that too. The way it is when he's kicking the shit out of Billy Batts, it's kind of a fuck you to the whole greaseball thing. The way they break it down, it was real greaseball shit. Yeah, and it is the way he just is right there. As soon as he attacks Billy Batts, he's right there kicking him in the face and fucking going all in on it. And I do like the way Jimmy's character is, because it's not that I guess he does come off more as a level-headed, smart guy. And of course, next to Tommy, who we see is just freaking out all the time. Of course, with Billy Batts, with Spider, with whatever. And then towards the end of the movie, though, we start to see how conniving Jimmy is. So, when they have the Lufthansa heist, which is another great choice they make, because you could make a whole movie on just the Lufthansa heist. But in this movie, I mean, partially because it's Henry's story and he was kind of just tangentially involved, at least by his admission. Who knows the truth to that? It's just a thing that kind of they talk about. I mean, it's obviously has big repercussions with a lot of the characters because we see the fallout from that. But it's just a thing we hear about on the radio, and then Henry's all in the shower, so excited about it. But I feel like other movies would wedge that in more and have this big set piece about the heist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'd watch that movie too, but
Yeah.
that's not this movie either. I mean, it's like it's weird as well because the amount of effort they put into something is not always in like relative to how much they get out of it because of the first big heist that Henry plans. It's like, oh yeah, this is the guy, he's going to give us the key, we're just going to go in and pick up $500,000, and then it's like him giving the money to the boss and like that was less work than pinching a truck, which seems, now as well, I have extra context being reminded of this. Like, of course, you pinch trucks. That's like what you do on an average night. You just go out and grab a truck. So I don't know what Junior was getting so upset about.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all part of the game.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know it's not quite Sopranos related, but I mean, it's in Goodfellas. The whole when he's being chased by helicopters, that whole segment is so fucking great. I know I'm stepping out on a limb here again, talking about great scenes in Goodfellas, but the way and reading Scorsese's take on it and how using the style again, like everything's really slick and stylish through the whole movie, and now that's starting to fall apart. Like it's the same stuff you've been seeing the whole movie, but now it's all jumbled and fucked up because we're in this mindset of a cokehead maniac that is paranoid, but obviously rightfully paranoid.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know. It's just it's so well constructed, and the way it's using cinema to make you feel like that character.
Yeah, and they build up the tension by just going into that amount of detail is going to make it tense, even though even if we believe that's just a random helicopter, when there's still like he's saying, yeah, at this time I'm just doing this, at that time I was doing that, and like we have the time showing up on the screen, like we know this is an important day, even if it's the first time you're watching this and you don't know it ends with him getting pinched. But yeah, you have those little graphics and everything, and it's building tension and building and going faster and faster and cutting faster. And I'm sure they cut it once and then like went back and like, okay, let's cut out even more so it's even more hectic of throwing you into the next shot and never standing still and always rambling the plan and thoughts in your head. And he has the same amount of anxiety and speed talking about the drugs they're going to sell for millions of dollars as talking about the tomato sauce and everything, because he's so tense and he's so like blah, 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 this and this and that, and I have to do this and I have to do that, and like going to get a hat is like the big thing towards the end there, and it all sort of goes to this speed where I'm surprised it doesn't end with, the film rattling and shaking and like burning out on screen like the literal film, and then like a projector sound stopping, and then like the next day I was not feeling so well. Like I'm surprised that's not how they go, because it's being torn apart at that point, the whole film.
Yes, and you know what? Now talking through it, I realized the connection to Sopranos. The way that whole segment / day, whatever, ends, it ends with, he goes to pull out because they're going to go get the hat, and the line he said, and I want to tie it to, now this isn't really a spoiler because the show we do is called Cut to Black, so we are understood that the Sopranos finale, the series finale, ends with a cut to black, and we understand there's debate around that, right? We can agree on that?
Right. I don't know if I want to hear what you're about to say, though, to be honest.
Well, no, but this is either way. I mean, do you understand that there's a discussion on what the cut to black means?
Yeah.
Like whether it means death or not, right? I don't think that's a spoiler.
Nah. But if you say that it's because it's relating it to this scene with the guy with the gun, it's going to be like, well, now I know it's either death or a cop.
Well, no. All I'm going to say is the way what his line says could maybe inform however you want to read that.
Okay.
It just because he says, I thought I was dead, but I heard all the noise. I knew they were cops. Only cops talk that way. If it would have been wise guys, I wouldn't have heard a thing. I would have been dead.
Right.
Now, I know we're teetering on the edge, but
I want to move on. I don't want to hear it, Jim.
I'm not, but that's the thing. I'm not going to go much more past that because I
Okay,
mean,
but here's how my mind works. It's like, okay, well now I know. I don't really know, but now I assume like, okay, so it's gonna be either there's gonna be silence, and that's gonna indicate that he was killed, or there's gonna be like sirens or some shit, or just the way someone says something is going to indicate that he wasn't killed, and there's gonna be debate over that.
I'm
I
not
don't know.
gonna. I mean, I'll just let you know. I mean, we're at this point here over 10 years later. People are still arguing over what the cut to black means.
Yeah.
I'm just saying this could support one of the theories. It doesn't really make a statement on anything else besides the cut to black, where if you were to read this, given this is a whole different, this is a movie that had nothing to do with the people writing it, but we do know that the writer was a fan. So, I mean, let's just put a little footnote here. And next year sometime, let's maybe bring this back up when we have our own points of view on what it means.
Okay. So we have gone
Fair?
over
Did
like
I ruin anything for you? Do you think I went too far there, or?
No, not really. No, I'm just hypersensitive because even just trying to, I just look up an actor and they're like, I type the name of an actor and it's like died in season 5 of The Sopranos. Like, no, I just wanted to fuck. Like literally, I will type an actor or I guess I'm stupid to type the name of a character, but fucking YouTube will put like a clip with a thumbnail and a title, and I don't blame someone for putting it on YouTube, but I just typed the name of the character. Don't show me his death scene the first thing you do, okay? So that's why I'm just like, everything, I'm just like, nope, not doing this, not doing that. So I was usually pushing against Google, but I pushed against you there. But I trust you, Jim. You would never do something like that, so... Sorry.
Yeah, well, and I think the good thing about that, it's just like I said, it's the title of the show, and it's an open argument, so it still can be read either way.
Yeah.
It's just something, if we're talking about it now, it's something we may want to revisit, depending on where we land at that point. And yeah, you're not blaming the person who put that video up; you're just blaming the algorithm. The algorithm shouldn't be giving you that first. Come on now.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, we have gone over basically the plot and the style of the movie. I mean, there's so many little details that we're not going to dive into because we don't have time for it. But is there anything more in specific that you want to go into before we round things off?
I guess one other thing that should be called out, obviously, the way they handle food, because that's obviously a big thing we see carry over into The Sopranos. There's that great scene when they're in prison and they're going over all the specifics on, slicing the garlic so thin with a razor that it just dissolves in the sauce. And then the guy making the sauce puts too many onions in the sauce. And he's like, oh, no, I don't put too many onions in the sauce. Nice little back and forth. And, we're seeing them live like kings in prison. And also just other scenes where, like we said, when he's mixing the sauce, getting the gravy ready for that dinner they're going to have before the big drug deal. And just throughout the whole movie. And of course, we see that in The Sopranos with the gabagool and the family dinners and the priest who loves to have the reheated ziti because the way the cheese kind of is better when it's reheated. It's just a nice little kind of cliche Italian stuff to see carry over.
Yeah, but isn't like I guess not Swedes, but a lot of cultures are like all about food, right?
Absolutely.
But it's the specifics of the food, and like there's no hungry priests here, but there's definitely like there's this feeling that like the making of the tomato sauce, and you always got to keep stirring it. It's like that part of the final day of him being a wise guy. Like, you got to keep stirring it. You got to keep moving. It's like what the camera is doing. It's like what the film is doing. So, yeah, it all ties together.
And of course, sorry to cut you off. Just one last thing on that. And of course, like you said, doesn't really necessarily have to be Italian, but it's just a great representation of family because they're big family dinners and you're sitting down. And Sopranos, of course, talks about two families. Goodfellas, Karen specifically says it's like he had two families when they're at the wedding. So it's a nice connective tissue for that.
That's true. And food is a thing in writing that I think people forget about. Like, because, I mean, literally just because we can cut out the boring stuff, and that would usually be considered like the cooking and cleaning and whatever of our lives, it's usually not like the main thing. But cooking and family is so tied together, sometimes culturally, but I guess like because food is something you eat together with other people, so no matter what culture it is, I think descriptions of that and description of the tradition behind it and the taste is something that we should all remember to put in our stories instead of just cutting past it.
Absolutely. Good point.
I also wanted to mention as an overall thing, I mean, Sopranos opens with Tony talking about feeling like he's come in at the end of something. And that's obviously like a huge part of the Sopranos of the real mob stuff is over now and now things are going to shit. And I mean, there's obviously, first off, this is depicting the period that is romanticized because when he's a kid, all he wants to do is be a gangster, and we see the wise guys on the street, and it looks a lot like Tony's childhood in a way. And at the same time, within this movie, towards the end, we see how everything's going to shit, and obviously Henry at the start would be someone who would never break this code and rat out his friends, but we see how like the psychopathy of the whole family means that he was going to get killed one way or the other because they think he might do it, and he would never have done it, but because you're going to kill him one way or the other, he has to do it. And like the way these things fall apart because of external factors but also internal factors, like that's here. It depicts the period from 55 to 80, I guess. But The Sopranos in the 90s also has this feel of, well, now things are really falling apart. So that's obviously something that's pulled partly from here as well.
Yes, for sure. It's almost like we're seeing, and the way Goodfellas points to, it's kind of like when people are getting into drugs and how like drugs affected it. Because from my understanding, with the mafia and stuff, that wasn't. It was maybe it was just an image thing, but they would like to present it as they weren't involved in that shit. Like
yeah,
they
we just kill people.
Yeah, it was just like running numbers and robbery and stuff like that. Like that's where they draw the line. And then when drugs start getting introduced, that gets somehow introduces longer sentences than murder, I guess. Or maybe it's easier to get away with murder than to get if you get caught with a bunch of drugs. I guess that kind of makes sense. And yeah, that ties in, like you said, with Sopranos, where it's a little bit with drugs, but they talk about like the RICO statutes. And I think that kind of also is connected with like drug sentencing and putting up these stacking years against someone to get them to rat. And then, of course, getting people to rat, increasing the paranoia in just the crews where you're right. It's like, why take a chance? Let's just shoot this guy. And then the guy's like, well, no, you don't believe me, but I wouldn't do this, but you're going to kill me. So I have no choice.
Yes. Exactly. And I mean, I guess that is interesting that like they're like, oh, we would never let people do drugs. That would make things fall apart. But at the same time, the reason he's in such a speeded up state and the reason he gets caught is basically that he's fucking up because he's doing all these drugs. So yeah, I mean, there's a sort of inspiration to Breaking Bad here as well, I feel. I mean, I guess any drug dealing thing has similar stuff, but I can't help but think of that as well, because people still debate the ending of Breaking Bad. Well, we won't mention what that is in case you haven't watched Breaking Bad, dear listener, but I would recommend it. And it's a similar thing where people are also debating what happened at the end, but however, it's super clear and the people debating it are stupid.
Yeah. And one of the great things about Goodfellas is the ending. I mean, I love the fourth wall breaking, like weird scene where he just gets up from the stand and he's talking to the audience and everyone around him is still like in court mode. Mm-hmm. But then just the fact that like his bad ending is that he has to live like us. He has to live in like a normal kind of boring suburb. And he can't even get good, spaghetti and marinara. He got like egg noodles and ketchup, and he's got to live the rest of his life like a schnook. And some people would, like idiots, would argue, like, where is his comeuppance? We need to see his comeuppance. Like a lot of people, Scorsese, when he put out Wolf of Wall Street, it's very similar in tone, but it's more about stock scumbags and how they rip people off.
Yeah.
And they don't make the connection that we, the audience, we're supposed to be annoyed. We're supposed to be angry at him for being a piece of shit and kind of getting away with it. And again, basically saying that our lives are his punishment. So it's just a great way to do that. And I'd always wondered why they had the Joe Pesci shooting at the camera, because back in the days as a lad when it wasn't just Wikipedia, but now of course everyone could look it up on Wikipedia. It's the ending to the movie The Great Train Robbery, the 1903 movie, where the character shoots at the camera in the same way, the final shot there.
Yes, and that's not just some old movie. That's like I don't necessarily dislike it, but this is kind of like if someone did this in a movie and showed me for feedback, I'd be like, yeah, you're kind of you're showing your film school there. Like you're kind of showing that, yeah, I also went to that lecture, and yes, we all know about the Great Train Robbery, and he shoots at the end, and it was such a revolutionary thing. For me, that's a reference that's so on the nose that it almost doesn't have the intended effect, because it's like, train robbery? Like, are you talking about what? But at the same time, I mean, I guess the point is supposed to be that you're kind of showing he's always going to be looking over his shoulder for that gunshot. Right? Is that the point of it?
Yeah, no, that Scorsese has said that. Yeah, it's basically, yes, he will forever be like running and looking over his shoulder. And then I guess that as a meta reference, because yeah, I mean, obviously it's one of the first films or something like that, or it's obviously a huge film school thing. I don't know. It doesn't have that same reverence for me, even though I consider myself like a film dude. I don't go too into like the
You're not into 1902 movies?
Yeah. But I guess putting that more in perspective, like say in a movie coming out in 1990, this is pre Kevin Smith, this is pre Quentin Tarantino, this is pre Community.
Yeah, true.
Is it like maybe a different stance of throwing that reference in where I mean, obviously, yeah, like film nerds and film school people are like, rolling their eyes maybe, but I guess the grand majority aren't picking up what's happening there as far as the reference.
No, it's true. It's the thing we always say that like I think this is a cliche, but only because people weren't doing this at the time, and then everyone watched Goodfellas, and like the reason that would annoy me is probably more related to Goodfellas and the influence that has had, which is a positive thing, than it has to do with the Great Train Robbery.
And isn't it what like people got scared like when that happened? Everyone is it like when the train came at the screen, everyone's like, "Oh my God, he's shooting us."
I think both of those things are kind of bullshit. Like that, I don't think either of those are actually true. I mean, in a way, but it's shocking in the way where a jump cut is fucking shocking, or like a train coming at you is going to be shocking even for you. If you're in a movie theater and that suddenly happens, that's going to be shocking. I don't think it was like, it's a real train, it's a real gun. It's like, it is the magic of cinema. That's what it does to everyone. But I'm not 100% on it. I personally think it's kind of bullshit, though.
Yeah, I'll never I love the idea of people running away from the train that comes on the screen. I'll never let go of that story. It's perfect. I love the idea of just everyone being so scared because they don't understand what a screen is and what's happening.
Yeah, but that actual shot, the train isn't coming directly at the camera because you can't put the camera in front of the train. It's even just passing it, kind of, and then people are getting off. So I guess you'd be hurrying to the other side of the cinema away from it. I guess that would make sense. Speaking of Henry Hill not getting his comeuppance and maybe not learning his lesson, and we're supposed to be mad. I didn't know this, but I read that Liotta, who played him, met him in an undisclosed city, and Hill, the real person, said he had seen the film and he told the actor that he loved it. So kind of shows that, I don't know. I mean, the film doesn't paint him in the best light, and so I guess, I mean, it adds up if he I don't know. I don't know how to take that, because mainly it romanticizes it, but then also it shows this bad side. But I feel most people watching it will just think, man, it's cool to be a gangster. And like, we see that in The Sopranos as well, when people are talking about and kind of bragging about their family connections to the mob and everything. And it's kind of cool and exciting, but at the same time, we look down on it. And it is a really interesting thing, and we're just starting to explore it now in season 1 of The Sopranos. I mean, our discussion of it, how these people can be both despised and loved at the same time. I mean, that's anything to do with an anti-hero, I guess, but it's more than that. It's just the whole community of it, the whole feeling, and all the likable parts, all the dislikable parts, and when they all come together and makes someone who's a real bastard. That's something we enjoy watching more than a good guy for some reason. And I look forward to watching a number of more seasons of it.
Yes, yeah. It should be noted that Henry Hill did pass away in 2012, and he was kicked out of the witness protection program, partially for I think he was still getting involved in drugs,
Yeah.
and I was reading stories that he was initially in Seattle and he would have big cookouts, but then he would get drunk and he'd start telling them that he was Henry Hill. He told them it like is real, like he just couldn't help like having to say who he was. Like I guess that happened twice, and they were like, "Okay, you gotta go." So, yeah. I mean, like you said, I think I think this is a nice, fun detour. I don't know what the audience thinks. You can let us know. A little buffer before we get into seasons, and I'd like to check out some of the other because I think there's an old. I mean, we'll talk about it. I mean, there's like an old gangster film that Tony watches, I believe, in season 3. So that's maybe something we might want to dig out and dig up and go through and see what we got. And I would like to watch, like, as we get later in the seasons. It's not a mafia movie, but David Chase did make a movie with James Gandolfini after The Sopranos. So I'd like to maybe take a look at that. There's a few things. And of course, we get the Sopranos prequel movie on the way. So let's get that timing right.
Yes, and I mean, of course, we also want to probably watch Godfather, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
Yep.
we'll have to watch Godfather as well.
But please do. I mean, let us know if you appreciate us taking this little detour. If you have any other influences that you think will influence our view of The Sopranos, because that's really what this is. It isn't just about taking a break. As Jim said, and it's not a joke, I was like, I don't get to watch The Sopranos this week. But at the same time, I have a friend who never watched Game of Thrones, and I always told him, you gotta watch Game of Thrones. And then when all the seasons, I mean, up to now, were out, he watched all of them in one go, and he did the same with Breaking Bad, and I was so fucking annoyed. Like, he never had to wait for any of it. So this is just a tiny little thing, but I do get I get the block between seasons, so this is even more making it not a binge for me. I am going kind of at a traditional pace, and I'm not going to be upset about missing a week. I'm going to feel lucky that it's all there for me to enjoy, and I'll keep enjoying it. And next week, we'll be back with our discussion of the first episode of season 2.
Yes, and there's one thing I do want to point out and say is, excuse me, I was listening to a YouTube playlist of Sopranos music, and then I started hearing songs, and it was reminding me of stuff. And dude, I didn't even realize how we have not even scratched the surface of The Sopranos. I'm so excited for the stuff we get to experience, and specifically for you to experience for the first time, because let me just say, there's a lot to get to, and it's going to be awesome.
Great. Okay, well, we have that to look forward to. Until next time, do tweet at us at showswhatyouknow. That's the letter U for you. And you can follow us there and see when we're doing live streams. We are currently going live every Sunday at about noon LA time. That's about 9 Swedish time. Tweet at us, and we'll let you know what the exact time is in your time zone. You can also see the live streams archived on our YouTube. That's youtube.com/showswhatyouknow. That's showswhatyouknow spelled out. And of course, everything is available at showswhatyouknow.com, where we also discuss other television shows, such as the upcoming Westworld season, where we will also be going week to week talking about each episode, because Westworld was one of our first big shows that we went into when we started Shows What You Know, and we're now excited to see it come back. So we'll be giving you a full range of offers here at the Shows What You Know television podcast network. I'm starting to think of us as a network, Jim. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think you're nailing it. We are a network, and you can even, like, if you do change the channel from the Shows What You Know network, you can actually just still keep it in the family by finding more of Jacob Burrows at awesomepedia.org and also Awesomepedia on YouTube, where there is a great Game of Thrones video and maybe some new stuff on the horizon. Also, you can find more from me at jimandthem.com and Jim and Them on YouTube.
Absolutely. And I mean, until next time, there is just one more thing we got to say.
What's that?
Cut to black.